Welcome back to Monster Tamer, a 2D Pokemon-like RPG created with Phaser 3. Previously, we went ahead and implemented in our battle state machine into our battle scene, and we connected all of our logic to have our overall battle flow. If you missed the previous videos, there will be links in the video description to the source code up to this point, as well as a complete source code for this video. There will also be a link to the previous videos if you'd like to catch up. So let's get started. All right, so now that we have our battle state machine in place, what we're going to do next is we're going to work on improving some of the functionality around our player input. So currently in our battle menu, when we need the player to interact with the game, it's not very clear that they need to push a button in order to proceed. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new game object. It's going to be a cursor, kind of indicating to the player that they should push a button to proceed to the next part of the battle. We're also going to improve some of our dialogue lines to no longer require player input. So during our battle flow, there'll be sometimes we want to just play informational text and then just wait a second or two before we proceed to the next line automatically instead of requiring the player to push the space button to continue. And so to get started with these improvements, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and jump over to our battle menu, and we're going to go ahead and add in the logic to allow us to set the message and not require input. So if we go into our source code, let's pop open battle. We'll go into UI, menu, and we're going to open up our battle menu.js file. All right, and so if we can come down below our handle player input method, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new method for updating our info pane message. So what we're going to do is we're just going to copy this block of code here. Let's go ahead and paste it. And then what we'll do is we're going to name this update info pane message, and we'll do no input required. And then what we'll do is we'll still have our message. But instead of messages, we're just going to have a single message. So one of the things with this method is we'll no longer display multiple messages. We're only going to do one. And so then what we're going to do is we no longer need to go ahead and set our queue information. Instead, what we'll do is we're just going to go ahead and update our game objects directly. So what we'll do is we'll go to our battle text game object line 1. Similar to what we did before, we're going to do our set text. We'll set it to our empty text, and we'll go ahead and set our alpha. And so we'll go ahead and set our alpha to 1 so it's visible. And what we're going to do, I'm just going to add a to-do here, and this is going to be animate message. So one of the things we've not implemented yet is animating our text, and that's something we're going to do soon. So what we're doing is we're basically mimicking the logic that we're doing in our update info pane with message method. However, we don't need to worry about going through our queue. So we're just going to have a new method that does the same thing where we update the display of our text. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add in the logic to set our text. So we'll copy this, we'll change our text, and we'll put it to our message. And we don't need to set alpha because we've already done that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set this waiting for player input to false. And then if we have a callback, we'll go ahead and call that callback. And so what we're doing, similar to what we did before, is we just have our to-do here because once we add in the functionality to animate our text, we'll want to start off with an empty string. And then as the animation progresses, we'll update that string. So that's why we're resetting this to an empty string before we just go ahead and set our text. All right, so with our new method, what we'll do is we're going to jump over to our battle scene. We're going to go ahead and use our new method. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down to our player attack method. And what we want to do is when our monsters are attacking, we're not going to require input from the player. We're just going to say foe used attack, wait a second or two, then transition to player animation. Similar to when we'll say Iguana Ignite used an attack, and then transition. So what we'll do is we'll come into our player attack, and then what we're going to do is instead of waiting for input, we'll change this to our new method. And this does not expect an array now, so we're just going to go ahead and get rid of that. Then we should be able to go ahead and save, get rid of our extra comma. All right, and then next we're going to want to do the same thing into our foe, so our enemy attack. So we'll update our method. We'll get rid of our array. We'll go ahead and save. And then we're also going to want to do the same thing when we have our monster appear into the scene. So when we say go iguana ignite, we'll do the same thing there. So we'll come down to our bring out monster battle state. And what we'll do is we'll change our method. Let's go ahead and get rid of our array and make it just a string. We'll go ahead and save. And so one last thing we're going to do is we're actually going to bump up the amount of time when we don't require player input, just so it gives them a little more time to read the message. So let's go ahead and change these from 500 milliseconds up to, so we'll change these from 500 milliseconds up to 1200. And so we'll do that in enemy attack, and then we'll do it in player attack. All right, so now we should be able to go ahead and test our logic. So wild enemy appears, we interact. Now say go iguanite should transition over to our battle scene. And now if we use slash, it should do the animation, faux animation, and we don't have to provide input. Nice. All right, so the next thing we're going to do for our player input is we're going to go ahead and add some functionality to go ahead and add some safety guards for when we're allowing the player to provide input. So currently, if we go up to our update method, when we are checking if the space key was pressed, we're not really checking the states that we're actually in. And so what this can do is it can affect the game if the player is pressing the space key, and we're just going ahead and we're going to handle the player input. Instead, we only want to handle player input in very specific cases. And so this is like going to be when we're in our pre-battle info. So basically in the cases where we call our method that says, hey, we're waiting for player input. So our pre-battle info, our post-attack check, flee attempt, and basically things like that. So what we'll do is after we check for a space key press, I'm just going to go ahead and throw in a comment here. So we're going to do limit input based on the current battle state we are in. If we are not in the right battle state, return early and do not process input. So what we're going to do is we'll have our check. So if the space key was pressed, and actually we'll just make a new if block. So we'll do if our space key was pressed. And then what we'll want to do is we want to go ahead and check if we are in the right battle state. So we're just going to add a parenthesis, and we'll do this battle state machine, and we'll do our current state name is equal to our battle states, and we'll have our pre-battle info. And what we're going to do is we're just going to copy this line here. And what we'll want to do is we'll have an or if we are in our post-attack check, or if we are in our flee attempt. Then what we want to do is we want to go ahead and handle our player input. So after our if, we'll go ahead and add in our bracket. And we want to go ahead and handle our player input, and then we want to go ahead and return. Then what we want to do is we want to check to see what the battle state is. So if we are not in the player input state, we don't want to do anything with our player input. Basically, any of our other battle states, we just want the logic to run, and we shouldn't do anything. So that's why we add these explicit states here. This is where we are expecting player inputs. We need to do something special. And then what we'll do is we'll just add an early return that if we're not in the player input state, so anything else, we should exit early. So we'll have an if this battle state machine dot current state name does not equal our battle states dot player input, we're going to go ahead and return early. All right, and so basically what we did here is we just added in a check, and we're saying, hey, for one of these three battle states, we want to go ahead and handle our player input. If we're not in one of those three states, if we're in any other state but our player input, we need to exit early. And if we are in player input, we need to run all of the same logic that we did before. And the reason we structured it this way is because in our flee attempt, post-attack, pre-battle info states, we just need to handle our player inputs so that we can progress to the next message and do our callbacks. Versus in our player input, what we want to do is we want to actually have our logic for checking for what menu was selected, if an attack was selected, and all of that logic. So that way, all that logic stays the same as before. And so if we want to go ahead and validate, what we should be able to do is come to our game scene. Let's go ahead and try fighting real quick. We'll go ahead and do our attack. Everything seems to be working. And if we press the space key or the back key a bunch of times during the battle sequence, it shouldn't affect anything until we get to the appropriate state. All right, so the last thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add in that game object. That'll be our player input cursor. So to do that, let's jump over to our battle menu. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add some properties for storing a reference to our game object. So at the top of our constructor, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add a new private property. And we're going to do user input cursor phaser image game object. And then we're going to make another property, and we're going to do user input cursor phaser tween. And so what we're going to do for our game object is we're going to have a tween that's going to play an animation on repeat, and we need to store a reference to that tween so we can stop that animation. And so for these, what we'll do is we're just going to copy our type real quick. And so we will have our image game object, and then we're going to have our tween. So it'll be a phaser tweens, and it'll be a tween. All right, and then so next what we'll do is we're going to come to the top of our class, and we're going to add in a new object. And so we're going to store a reference to our position. And then so that way, as we animate our object, we have a reference we can always reset it to. So for our object, we only need the Y position because we're only going to animate it up and down. We're not going to animate it left and right. And so instead of our attack menu cursor position, we will have our player input cursor position. And now the last thing we need to do is we actually need to go ahead and create this game object. So we're going to go ahead and make a new method, and we're going to go ahead and call that. So we'll call this create player input cursor. And then what we need to do is we'll come down to the bottom of our class, and we'll go ahead and create this method. So at the very bottom, what we'll do is we'll have our new private method. And so inside here, we'll go ahead and create our image game object, and we'll update its positioning. And then finally, we'll create our tween for our game object. All right, so then in our method, what we'll do is we're going to reference our new property. So we'll have user input phaser image game object, and we're going to set that equal to our this scene. We'll do add, and we'll have an image, okay, our image game object. Now we need our X and Y position. So we're going to go ahead and do 0. All right, so for our Y value, we'll do 0, and then we need to provide our texture. So this will be our UI asset keys and our cursor. All right, so then after we create our game object, what we're going to want to do is we want to go ahead and scale it, and we're going to modify the angle of our game object. So we're just going to grab a reference to this, and so we'll do this, our game object, we'll call the set angle method, and we're going to go ahead and rotate this by 90 degrees, and then we're going to go ahead and call the set scale method. And so we'll do 2.5, and we'll do 1.25. And so what we're doing here is our game objects, our cursors normally pointed to the right. We're going to rotate it so it points down, and then modify some of the scaling so that way it looks a little bit different than our existing cursor game object. All right, so then after we do that, we just want to go ahead and hide our game object. So we're going to do set alpha, we'll set it to 0. So after we create our game object, we need to go ahead and create our tween. So we'll go ahead and reference our user input cursor phaser tween, and we'll set that equal to this scene add, and we'll do a tween, and we need to provide our configuration. So for our configuration, we're going to add in a delay. We're going to manually set that to 0, so we won't wait before we start the animation. Go ahead and add a duration. We're going to do 500 milliseconds, so our overall, our animation will be half a second. And we'll do repeat, and we'll do -1. And what this will do is it's going to tell Phaser to go ahead and play this animation on repeat until we manually pause it or stop it and clean it up. Finally, we need to specify our property that we want to apply this to. So for our property, this will be our Y value. And we are going to do this from our player input cursor position, our Y value. Same for our start value. And then we just need to do our to, so how far we're going to animate it to. So we're going to do our player input cursor position Y, and we're just going to add 6 to our value. And then the last thing we need to do is specify the target of where we're going to apply this tween to. And so this is going to be our user input cursor phaser image game object. Finally, we're just going to go ahead and pause our tween after it's created, and then that way we're not running the animation when our game object is actually hidden. And so now that we've created our game object in our tween, we need to go ahead and add in some properties to go ahead and actually show these, and that way we can control when we play this animation. So if we come up to the top of our class, what we'll do is we'll go right with our other show and hide methods. And so we're going to add a new method. So we'll do play input cursor animation. And we'll make both of these public. And so then what we'll do is let's go ahead and do our hide input cursor. And so for hide input cursor, this is basically us just pausing our tween and also hiding our game object. So I'm just going to come back down to our code real quick. We're going to copy this line, and I'm going to paste it right here so we can grab both of them and revert that. We'll come back up to our hide method, and we'll go ahead and paste those. And then so in our play input cursor animation method, we're going to want to update the position of our game object. And so our game object is going to be dependent on where our BattleText game line actually ends. And so right now, depending on the message display, this length will vary, and we want to display our cursor near the end of our text line. And so to do that, we just need to reference our BattleText game object and get its display width. So what we'll do is we're going to do our update. We're going to do our user input phaser image game object. We will call the set position method to go ahead and set this. And then what we need to do is we need to reference our BattleText game object line 1, get its display width. And what we want to do is we want to add the display width of our image game object. So we'll do our user input phaser image game object display width. And we're going to multiply this by a value just so there's some spacing between the two. Then that way they don't overlap. And then finally, we need to go ahead and set our Y value. So what we'll do is we'll do our user input phaser image game object, and we will do our .y. And then that way, when we update our position, we'll make sure the Y stays the same. So once we do this, we want to go ahead and show our game object. So I'm just going to copy this real quick, and we will call the set alpha method, and we're going to set it to 1. And then we're going to go ahead and play our tween, and we're going to do that by doing the restart method. So this will restart it from the beginning and play our animation. All right, so now we have our new logic. What we need to do is actually call our two methods. And so for hiding our input cursor, what we'll want to do is we're going to want to hide it if we're switching to our main battle menu, or if we're getting ready to display a new message to the player, because we want to not show that until the animation is complete. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down to our switch to main battle menu method. And so when we go to our switch to main battle menu method, what we'll do is we're just going to add, and we'll do waiting for player input. Let's add that and set that to false. And then we're also going to call our hide input cursor method. Then what we want to do is in our update info pane with message method, right after we update our text, what we'll want to do is we'll want to hide our input cursor. So then we want to go ahead and show our game object and play our animation. And so what we'll do is we're going to add that at the bottom of our method here. So after we get our message and we show we're waiting for player input, we will go ahead and show and play our animation. All right, so what we should be able to do is we come over to our scene, we should be able to test. And so right away, when our battle scene restarts, we'll see that our monster has appeared, and now we're waiting and showing that we need to interact with the game with our cursor. And then if we go ahead to the space key, we show our text where we don't need input, so we don't play our cursor. And now if we go ahead and do our attack, Same thing, we should display our information and not require input. But if we try something like flee, we should say, hey, you failed to run away, and we require the player to provide input before we go back to our menu. All right, and that actually wraps up our player input improvements. And with that, that brings this video to an end. So in our next video, this is when we're going to transition to start working on our battle scene polish, and we'll start adding in the stuff for actual game feel. So we'll start adding in things like our text animations. We'll be adding in monster animations, so we'll show when they take damage. We'll animate them when they appear on the screen and leave when they faint. We're going to start adding in our attack animations. So we'll be able to add in various things like a slash attack, an ice attack, scene transitions, and much more. As a reminder, there's a link in the description of the video to the completed source code for this video. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did enjoy the video, please consider liking the video and hitting the bell icon to be notified when the next video in this series is released. For more great Phaser 3 content, please see some of the links on your screen now.